There is a profound, deeply uncomfortable question looming over every single press briefing in Washington and Tehran today. A question that no official spokesperson has dared to address with any degree of honesty or clarity. This morning, Iran's foreign ministry delivered a diplomatic bombshell to the world. Tehran officially confirmed that it will not be sending its team of negotiators to Pakistan for the highly anticipated second round of peace talks. The global ceasefire is definitively set to expire this coming Wednesday. Despite this glaring refusal, high-level American figures, including J.D. Vance, Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner, boarded their planes and flew to Islamabad anyway. They are essentially sitting in a diplomatic vacuum of their own making, waiting for an adversary who has publicly vowed not to show up. But the most critical, terrifying part of this unfolding story is absolutely not the American presence in Pakistan. It is the absolute, deafening silence emanating from Beijing. China is the nation whose relentless oil purchases provide Iran with the vital economic oxygen required to boldly refuse American demands. China is the technological superpower whose commercial satellites directly guided the lethal Iranian ballistic strikes against American military bases. China is the geopolitical heavyweight whose Security Council veto has systematically blocked every single enforcement mechanism Washington has tried to implement at the United Nations. And yet, today, the Chinese government has issued absolutely no statement regarding Iran's explosive refusal to talk. They have uttered not a single word about the Tuska, the Iranian cargo ship that the United States military violently seized on Sunday while it was en route from China to Iran. There has been no urgent back-channel call from Foreign Minister Wang Yi to press Tehran back to the negotiating table. There is nothing but a vast, empty void. I want to spend this time meticulously explaining exactly what that silence tells us, because I firmly believe China's nothing today is doing significantly more heavy lifting in these negotiations than any words spoken out loud in Washington or Tehran. To truly understand the sheer gravity of this moment, we must start by dissecting the reality of Iran's refusal. If you turn on any major news network right now, you will see a very specific, coordinated framing of this event. Most of the mainstream media coverage is treating Iran's refusal as mere stubbornness, as bad faith, or as the actions of a rogue nation simply playing reckless games with the ceasefire clock. The narrative being aggressively pushed is that Iran is the sole irrational problem, that if the Iranian delegation would just act like adults and board a plane to Islamabad, a comprehensive peace deal could magically happen. That framing completely and utterly misses the strategic calculation that Tehran is actively making. Iran's refusal to travel is not an emotional outburst. It is not an act of blind stubbornness. It is a cold, calculated, structural decision based on a very specific and bitter experience from the first round of talks. I want you to think deeply about those 21 grueling hours in Islamabad. It was the highest level direct meeting between the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran since the 1979 revolution. You had J.D. Vance and Iran's parliament speaker, Mohammad Bakr Ghalibaf, sitting directly across from each other, looking each other in the eye, with Pakistani mediators desperately trying to bridge the gap in the room. And when that historic meeting ended, Ghalibaf stepped up to the microphones and said something that every geopolitical analyst needs to read very carefully. I want to give you his exact translated words because the precision of his language matters immensely. He said, "Before the negotiations, I emphasize that we have the necessary good faith and will, but due to the experiences of the two previous wars, we have no trust in the opposing side." He is describing a catastrophic, insurmountable trust deficit. This isn't a gap in military capability. It is a fundamental, existential breakdown in the belief that an agreement with the American empire means absolutely anything once the ink is dry. Let us look at the historical record from Tehran's perspective. America signed the JCPOA nuclear deal in 2015, celebrated it globally, and then unilaterally tore it up in 2018 under a new administration. Fast forward to the current conflict, America proudly announced a temporary ceasefire and then immediately imposed a massive, suffocating naval blockade right inside that exact same ceasefire window. Furthermore, America's president stood in front of reporters and confidently stated that Iran had agreed to every single term of a new deal, while Iran's own foreign ministry was forced to go public just hours later, explicitly calling the American president's claims entirely false. Foreign Minister Arakchi himself stated on the record that Iran was mere inches away from a finalized deal before the United States abruptly and aggressively shifted the diplomatic goalposts. According to one highly placed U.S. source speaking to Reuters, the two sides were genuinely 80% of the way there. So from Iran's vantage point, they walked 80% of the way toward the most significant peace deal in half a century. They made the painful compromises, and then they watched the American side arbitrarily move the terms. And then, as if to aggressively underscore the depth of that bad faith, the United States military took kinetic action on Sunday. They fired live rounds from a 5-inch naval gun directly into the engine room of an Iranian cargo ship in international waters. They sent heavily armed Marines rappelling from helicopters onto the deck to seize control of the vessel, and then they proudly announced the military seizure on social media for the entire world to see. That ship, the Tuska, was actively heading from China to Iran. Arakchi immediately called this violent seizure irrefutable proof of America's total lack of seriousness in diplomacy. The state-run news agency, IRNA, went even further, publishing an editorial calling the proposed second round of talks a media game, a scripted, theatrical performance designed entirely to assign blame to Iran, rather than a genuine, good faith attempt at reaching a settlement. This is definitively not a story of a stubborn regime. It is the story of a nation that has learned through decades of painful geopolitical lessons exactly what American words are worth when the television cameras are turned off. But as we analyze this refusal, we must recognize a terrifying reality that makes this situation infinitely more volatile. The Iran we see operating in these chaotic news cycles is not one unified, monolithic entity. It is two entirely different Irans, locked in a fierce, existential civil war over the future of the country's foreign policy. There is the first Iran, the Iran of Abbas Arakchi, the seasoned diplomat, the pragmatist, the negotiator who willingly flew to Islamabad for 21 hours, and who boldly declared the Strait of Hormuz open on Friday. That specific Iran desperately wants to negotiate. That Iran knows the crippling economic damage of the American naval blockade is profoundly real. That Iran intimately understands that if the ceasefire completely collapses on Wednesday and the American bunker buster bombs start falling from the sky again, the next phase of this war will be infinitely harder to survive than the last one. But then there is the second Iran, the Iran of the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard, the supreme military hardliners who ruthlessly overruled Arakchi's opening of Hormuz within mere hours on Friday. The generals who deliberately sent armed gunboats to fire live ammunition at commercial oil tankers on Saturday. The commanders who issued the blistering statement vowing severe retaliation after the American seizure of the Tuska on Sunday. These two Irans are genuinely, deeply in disagreement about how to handle this critical moment. And the reason that intense internal disagreement matters so heavily for the fate of global security is that America is stubbornly trying to sign a delicate peace deal with the first Iran, while the second Iran just keeps firing rockets at ships. The glaring contradiction we are witnessing today, where the official foreign ministry unequivocally says no travel to Pakistan, while an Iranian Parliamentary Security Committee member named Ibrahim Azizi tells Al Jazeera that Iran will likely send a team today or tomorrow, is not a miscommunication. It is the deafening sound of those two Irans fighting the internal argument in real time, right in front of the world. Now, Let us shift the lens to the true architect of this stalemate. Let me thoroughly explain what China knew before it decided to retreat into absolute silence. China has been, without a shadow of a doubt, the single most important external actor in this entire war. Not through the aggressive use of force, not through grand theatrical declarations at the United Nations, but through three highly specific, incredibly lethal things it has done quietly and consistently since day one. First, China has kept the Iranian economy breathing. They have provided an indestructible financial lifeline. Before this war erupted, Iran was exporting approximately 1.68 million barrels of oil per day. During the most intense, brutal weeks of this conflict, with the Strait of Hormuz largely closed to Western shipping and the American aerial bombing campaign at its absolute peak, Iran actually exported 1.84 million barrels of oil a day. That is more oil exported during a devastating war than before it started. How does a country whose supreme leader was assassinated, whose nuclear facilities were bombed, and whose integrated air defenses were severely degraded, manage to export more oil during wartime than in peacetime? The answer is China's dark fleet. This is a sprawling, multi-billion-dollar ghost network of aging supertankers that operate entirely outside international law. They use spoofed transponders to project fake GPS locations. They fly the sovereign flags of random landlocked countries to mask their true ownership. They conduct incredibly dangerous mid-ocean ship-to-ship transfers of crude oil in the dark waters near Malaysia. They process massive payments in Chinese yuan through a network of second-tier Chinese banks that operate completely outside the American-controlled SWIFT financial network. Officially, China's customs records show zero oil imports from Iran. But China's recorded imports of so-called Malaysian crude run to an astonishing 1.3 million barrels per day, which is more than double Malaysia's entire national oil production capacity. The mathematical equation is undeniable. The oil is Iranian, the paperwork is forged, and the system is flawless. Right now, as we speak, there are 157.7 million barrels of Iranian crude oil floating at sea, and 97.6% of it is heading directly to the coast of China. The American naval blockade simply cannot reach this system. It was designed to be untouchable. Even the specific operational language issued by CENTCOM explicitly excludes vessels heading to non-Iranian ports, a legal loophole written precisely so that massive Chinese tankers would not need to be forcibly stopped. Here is what that cowardice means in practice. President Trump announced on Truth Social that the US Navy would seek and interdict every single vessel in international waters that paid a transit toll to Iran. Yet, China's state-owned COSCO tankers have passed right through Iran's toll system in the Strait of Hormuz. By Trump's own explicit language, those Chinese ships should have been intercepted and boarded by US Marines. They were not. CENTCOM's operational rules said something entirely different. Ships transiting to non-Iranian ports would not be impeded. A COSCO tanker loading at Karg Island, Iran's main export terminal, and sailing directly to a Chinese refinery is technically going from an Iranian port to a non-Iranian port. Under CENTCOM's carefully crafted language, no interception is required. The massive gap between what the American president tweeted and what the American military implemented is not a drafting error. It is a deliberate, terrifying choice. Somebody at the highest levels of the Pentagon decided that stopping a Chinese state-owned vessel in international waters is not an Iran problem, it is a China problem. And a direct military confrontation with China is a completely different category of geopolitical nightmare that America is absolutely not prepared to open right now. Second, China has kept Iran perfectly diplomatically protected and militarily guided. When America desperately proposed a UN resolution authorizing international force to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, China and Russia immediately vetoed it. Not a single allied country joined America's blockade. But the protection went far beyond diplomacy. The Financial Times recently confirmed, utilizing highly classified, leaked Iranian documents, that the IRGC used advanced satellite imagery from a Chinese commercial firm called Earth Co. to meticulously target American military bases. They monitored Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia, Muwafiq Salti Air Base in Jordan, sensitive positions near the 5th Fleet Naval Base in Bahrain, and Erbil Airport in Iraq. CBS News independently confirmed this terrifying reality from 2 separate U.S. officials. China did not just buy Iran's oil to keep them funded. China actively provided the eyes so Iran could see exactly where American soldiers were sleeping, allowing their ballistic missiles to hit those bases with deadly accuracy. Third, and this connects directly to the chaos of today, China has the power to press Iran, but only does so when it serves Beijing. Last Thursday, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi called Araghchi. That single phone call produced Friday's shock announcement that Hormuz was fully open. Trump posted his naive thank you in capital letters, and global oil prices dropped 9%. And then America kept the blockade on Iranian ports. In response, Iran furiously reimposed Hormuz restrictions. IRGC gunboats fired on commercial tankers on Saturday. America retaliated by violently seizing the Tuska on Sunday, and China. China said absolutely nothing. Let me use an analytical framework I call the signal reader. In high-stakes international relations, silence from a major global power is never the mere absence of a statement. It is a profound, calculated statement in itself. And the critical question is always, who is reading that silence, and what exact message are they extracting from it? Iran is reading China's silence with absolute precision. Here is exactly what the regime in Tehran reads. China's last public act was Wang Yi calling Araghchi on Thursday to press for the opening of Hormuz. Since that moment, America seized a Chinese origin vessel. Iran vowed bloody retaliation. Vance flew to Pakistan. Iran boldly announced it would not attend the peace talks, and China said nothing. Iran reads that exact sequence as structural permission. Not explicit written permission, but the implicit permission that comes from a giant partner who is still buying your oil, still blocking UN resolutions against you, still providing the economic oxygen you need to refuse American demands, and who has ruthlessly calculated that saying nothing right now costs China less than saying something. Consider the geopolitical cost if China were to actually speak. If Wang Yi issues a formal statement about the Tuska, demanding that America release an Iranian vessel that originated from China, Beijing publicly confirms to the world that the voyage served Chinese strategic interests. That immediately opens a Pandora's box of questions regarding what the actual cargo was and what deep logistical relationship China maintains with Iran's military supply network. If Wang Yi calls Araghchi and publicly presses Iran back to the negotiating table, China implicitly accepts accountability for whatever chaotic actions Iran takes next, including walking away from any deal that China helped broker. China absolutely does not want that accountability. China wants the global prestige and credit for any eventual peace deal without any of the accountability for Iran's violent behavior in the meantime. So the strategists in Beijing calculate the exact cost of speaking versus the cost of not speaking, and they choose the void. And Tehran reads that calculation. Perfectly, our superpower partner has decided that our refusal to go to Pakistan is acceptable. We can afford to stay home and let the Americans sweat. This is not a passive silence. It is an active, weaponized one. China's foreign ministry holds a televised press briefing every single weekday. The Tuska seizure happened on Sunday. By Monday morning, every major global news outlet had confirmed the ship originated from China. If China wanted to speak, it had the mechanism, the podium, and the perfect moment. The absence of a statement is itself a deliberate, aggressive act. The structural reason China's silence serves its interests better than pressing Iran for peace is straightforward and brutal. If Iran makes a comprehensive agreement, one that truly ends the war, reopens Hormuz on American terms, and includes strict, verifiable nuclear constraints, Iran instantly becomes less dependent on Chinese buyers. A post-deal Iran, flush with sanctions relief and renewed access to Western markets, does not need to sell its crude oil at a massive discount to Chinese refineries in the dark. China would instantly lose its highly lucrative, decade-long position as Iran's sole major customer. Furthermore, America would emerge looking victorious, having demonstrated to the globe that its tools of military blockade and maximum pressure can successfully produce a nuclear deal. Al Monitor published a brilliant analysis with a headline that captures this dynamic. Precisely, China plays peacemaker while letting America bleed. China calls for peace in every official statement, while China buys Iranian oil through every American sanction. China presses Iran toward talks only when that serves Chinese commercial interests. And when those talks inevitably collapse, when Iran refuses to travel, when America seizes a Chinese origin ship, China stays perfectly silent, because the current state of this war, extended, inconclusive, humiliatingly expensive for America, and highly profitable for China, is infinitely better for Beijing than a clean, decisive American victory. There is one more crucial dimension we cannot ignore: the upcoming Trump-Xi summit in Beijing, scheduled for May 14th. The American president is flying directly to the Chinese capital. Hundreds of billions in trade tariffs, global technology supremacy, the fate of Taiwan, all of it is built around that single meeting. Every single decision China makes between now and May 14th is weighed heavily against whether it makes that summit harder or easier to manage. Issuing a formal, angry diplomatic protest about the Tuska forces Trump to respond publicly to China's interference in his own blockade enforcement. It creates a massive diplomatic incident right before Air Force One lands. China will not do that, not for a single cargo ship. The summit is worth infinitely more than a protest. Now, I must steelman America's position because I want you to violently test this analysis, not just passively accept it. America's core argument is that the pressure strategy is actually working. The naval blockade has successfully turned back 25 ships. Iran's national currency, the rial, is down 15%. Iran's own central bank warned the regime of a 12-year recovery timeline. Iran came 80% of the way to a deal at Islamabad. The Lebanon ceasefire successfully removed one of Iran's primary preconditions. The American steelman goes further. J.D. Vance flying to Pakistan even after Iran's public refusal is not an act of desperation. It is a deliberate, powerful signal to every mediating country, Pakistan, Egypt, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, that America is the rational party that actually showed up to the table. And if no deal is reached, the world will have seen Iran explicitly refuse to attend. That diplomatic positioning matters immensely. It gives America the narrative high ground heading into whatever happens after Wednesday, whether that is an extension, a brutal resumption of bombing, or a third round of talks. That Steelman argument is highly coherent. The economic pressure is very real, the contradictions inside Iran's government are massive, and a deal before Wednesday, while highly unlikely, is not structurally impossible. But here is the fatal flaw that the American steelman cannot answer. Every single round of American pressure has produced movement up to a certain point and then stalled. Why? Because the point at which Iran literally cannot absorb any more pressure is located further out than America's current tools can reach. As long as China is relentlessly buying 157 million barrels of Iranian crude through a shadow system specifically designed to be untouchable by American blockades, Iran has economic oxygen, enough to firmly refuse, enough to call the talks a media game, enough to fire gunboats at a tanker on Saturday, and enough to seize the moral high ground on Sunday when America responds by taking an Iranian ship. America's pressure strategy is trying to squeeze a country that has a massive, untethered lifeline that America cannot or will not cut. And the superpower holding that lifeline today said absolutely nothing about the ship it was sending when America finally did cut it. Let me close with 3 specific critical signals you must watch before Wednesday, because the sequence of events in the next 48 hours will tell you more than any White House press briefing ever could. The first signal, watch whether China says anything highly specific about the Tuska. If China stays completely silent on the Tuska, that is Beijing deciding the ambiguity serves its grand strategy better than a formal protest. If China speaks out, it tells you the seizure of a Chinese origin vessel crossed a red line that even their current cautious calculation cannot absorb quietly. The second signal, watch whether Wang Yi calls Araghchi again before Wednesday. If Wang Yi makes another urgent call before Wednesday, it would signal that China has officially decided a finalized deal right now serves its interests better than continued chaotic limbo. Conversely, if China stays entirely silent through Wednesday without a single call from Wang Yi, that is, China coldly deciding the current state of war is highly preferable to the outcome of a peace deal on America's current terms. The third and most definitive signal, watch what Iran's actual delegation does, not what its foreign ministry tweets. If an Iranian team actually arrives in Islamabad despite the official refusal, the diplomatic government won the internal argument, and the back channel with Pakistan is producing massive results that the press briefings cannot capture. If no delegation arrives by Tuesday night, the military hardliners have won absolute control. The ceasefire will expire on Wednesday with no deal in sight, and President Trump will face the terrifying choice he has been desperately deferring for 52 days, authorizing the resumption of a massive regional war. I urge you to actively push back on this analysis if you see it differently. Go read the foreign policy piece describing China's reaction to the blockade as suspiciously muted. Read Al Monitor on China playing peacemaker while letting America bleed out. Read the Financial Times report on Earth ICO and the IRGC utilizing Chinese satellites for lethal targeting. And then I want you to ask yourself the chilling question that no mainstream press briefing is asking today. China's last active move was aggressively pressing Iran to open Hormuz on Thursday. Since that exact moment, America violently seized a Chinese origin ship. Iran vowed bloody, unyielding retaliation. The fragile ceasefire is 2 days from expiring, and China said nothing.